Hello, everybody. Thanks for joining. Looks like we still got people filing on in. Welcome to Little Residence Big Liability. I'm your host, JT. Got some wonderful guests returning with us today. Melinda McBeth, May again Davison. Going to jump into it. And we've got a good one for you. Today's agenda is going to be a little bit of everything. We're going to talk about hazard landscapes, EVs and apartments, pools, communal areas, parkways, renovation areas, windows, balconies, and how technology could help. So this is going to be a jam-packed webinar today. If you have questions, please feel free to pop them in the chat. First up, we have Melinda McBeth. She is counsel at Outfit Kerman, where she represents landlords, property managers across Maryland in fair housing disputes, leasing issues, also real estate litigation. She's a formal criminal defense attorney with over a decade of trial experience, and she's hosted with us before and multiple webinars. And she also hosts her own multifamily webinars regarding housing laws. So, Melinda, thanks so much for joining us again here.
You for having me, as always. Pleasure to be here.
All right. And then we also got Megan Davison. Now, Megan is a senior vice president at Alliant Insurance. They focus heavily on risk management, multifamily and residential, with multifamily communities and portfolios across the United States. Alliant Insurance is one of the top 5 insurance brokers in the nation with offices nationwide. They protect over 3.5 million multifamily units annually and are built around a specialty model with resources, expertise, insurance markets, and proprietary softwares built for multifamily industry and real estate practice groups. She was also just recently promoted to senior VP. So congratulations on that, Megan, and thanks so much for joining us again.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. Cloud Structure. Then you got me. I'm the National Account Executive here with Cloud Structure, and I'll be running the webinar today for you. So, of course, we got some numbers. Always like to start out with stats. Cloud Structure, who we are, what we do. We're truly the creme de la creme in multifamily security with a 98% deterrent rate across the board, 100% customer satisfaction, and 1% calls on emergency dispatch. So pleasure to be here for you guys. All right. So jumping into it, so I'm going to let Melinda kind of give a breakdown of her offices, the practices, and what they offer. And then we'll jump into some of the slides and topics right after.
So, off at Kerman, that is the firm where I work. We are one of the fastest growing full service civil law firms in the United States. We have almost 300 attorneys. We have 19 offices spread across 9 different states. We are a full service from the civil litigation end. We have a landlord representation group, which is where I hang out. We also have family law. We have trust and estates. We have corporate litigation, corporate mergers, bankruptcy. Basically, if you need a civil attorney, we do all the things. And if we are not in your area yet, just give it a little bit of time and we probably will be soon.
Great. All right. And then Megan, do you want to tell us about your practice?
Absolutely. So I'm just going to say I quit counting at 30 years and have specialized in multifamily and oftentimes affordable housing for about the last 25 years. We are nationwide. I'm licensed in 50 states, and we have a proprietary platform that we insure multifamily on, as well as traditional markets. And because of our size and reach, we have access to virtually everyone. Thanks for having me today.
Awesome. Great. Well, thanks for joining us. Next up, we're kind of going to jump into it. Now, verdicts are getting bigger and always like starting off with some stats. So as you can see here on the next slide, it's throwing some numbers at you. And some of these numbers are pretty high. These are really just focusing on nuclear verdicts. And right off the bat, 14 or 15.4% increase, 15.4% of all nuclear verdicts are premise liability claims. So, we're going to speak into that. We're also going to talk about the 52% increase in 10 million plus nuclear verdicts in 2024 alone, which was hitting an all-time high. That's a surge, 81.5% surge in 100 million plus in thermonuclear verdicts in 2024. Huge stats. And we're going to jump into the whole fair housing scenario here.
So for all of you on the call, I'm sure, have heard about the Fair Housing Act and fair housing. Basically, there are protected classes of people, and depending on your state, there may be different protected classes that apply in your specific jurisdiction. But generally, the law prohibits landlords from discriminating against people in those protected classes. Traditionally, that's race, familial status, disability, national origin. Here in Maryland and some other states, we have source of income as well as a protected class. The theory being that people should not be treated differently or to have more barriers to overcome than just your average Joe Schmo when it comes to finding, retaining, or maintaining housing. You are not, as landlords, able to refuse or limit renting to families based on the ages of their children, composition of their families. You cannot segregate children to certain floors of buildings or sections of your property. I've heard sometimes landlords will want to put all the kids on the bottom floor so that there's nobody living below them to hear the little feet running around. That is discrimination. You can't encourage people who have families to maybe live in one part of your property or apply to one of your properties but not the other. Steering, trying to influence where people in protected classes go is also a fair housing violation. It's potentially a fair housing violation to impose special rules like curfews or supervision and requirements only on families who have children. And you certainly cannot evict or refuse to rent to anyone who is pregnant, who may be having a child join the household, who maybe has an afterborn child, someone who's born after they sign the lease and move in. All of those kinds of things are issues that every landlord needs to be aware of and careful about when they're navigating liability issues. There's huge intersection between liability and fair housing.
Good. Thank you for that. Let's see. Now we're moving over to EVs and apartments. Now, EVs and apartments, I know both of you guys can kind of speak to some of this language on these next couple of slides here.
I think the example of this right now is there was a family in Philadelphia, I think it was 2022, where a hoverboard caught fire. And two girls, they were aged 10 and 15, both passed away. And so I am particularly sensitive to this one. I've had fires in residences and multifamily properties that I've insured that have had fires as well. And so it is a really important deal to have some rules surrounding this. And we'll hit on that a little bit later as well.
Okay. Now let me ask you, if a property has no lease language on indoor e-bike charging or anything like that today and something happens tomorrow, does insurance treat that as like a known risk or how does that handle?
Great question. They do not. So it's really an unintentional issue. It's not considered anything other than that. It's a fortuitous thing. And so an insurance company would pay the loss. And then what they would typically do is they would go back and subrogate against the parties. So they might subrogate against the renter. Ideally, your renter would have renter's insurance that may or may not pick up coverage, by the way, because that renter's insurance will typically exclude motorized vehicles. If a hoverboard or an e-bike is considered a motorized vehicle, they wouldn't cover it. They also may subrogate against the manufacturer. So in the case that I mentioned with the two girls who passed away in the house fire in Philadelphia, Target sold the e-bike and it was produced by a company called Jetson Electric Bikes. There's a $38.5 million settlement that was paid to the family. And of course, the insurance company that paid for the damage to the house had subrogated against those parties as well. And so they were made whole for what they paid out for the damage to the house. So the lease won't typically exclude coverage for it, but they may subrogate against the homeowner. Does that make sense? and
Yeah.
subrogate against the manufacturer.
Okay. That does make sense. Now, let me ask you this, Melinda. Some residents, they rely on e-bikes or scooters to get to and from work, school. They're not just for fun. So if that's the case, can you ban charging altogether? How does that work and it not be unfair for residents who need them the most?
Owners of e-bikes and scooters are not a protected class for fair housing purposes. So my brief answer is I don't care if you want to ban e-bikes and scooters. If there's a legitimate safety reason for it, then that's fine. I mean, now of course you may have some intersectionality with fair housing there. It's possible that there are residents who have mobility issues, and then that would fall into the protected class of disability. So they may, in that scenario, I would say you can still create a blanket policy that says no e-bikes, no scooters, and certainly no charging of either one of them on your property. And then you may have to deal with reasonable accommodation requests,
Mhm.
right? Reasonable accommodations are changes to a landlord's policy that are necessary to allow a person in a protected class to enjoy and use their homes in the same manner as anyone who's not in a protected class. So you may get a doctor's note from somebody, or just have a tenant show up and say to you, if their disability is readily apparent, you can see it with your eyes, I need my scooter because I have a mobility issue. In that case, you may be required to allow an exception to your policy, let them keep the e-scooter or the bike in their unit, but you can also engage in what's called a interactive dialogue with the tenant to try and find a solution that is both safe for the entire property, but also is satisfactory to them to allow them that same use and enjoyment of their property. And no, there's not going to be a one size fits all solution here. It's almost always going to be situational.
And the
Okay.
other the other issue to add to that too is you can, if you're allowing e-bikes in any form on your property or hoverboards, require that they be UL certified. So that would reduce your fire risk and the electrical load for sure. But I would
Okay.
require that with anybody who has any of those types of modes of transportation.
So
Mhm.
UL certification, major.
Mhm.
Now, what about outdoor charging? Is there, I know some states are requiring that to be
Right.
those things to be charged outside. How does that all fall into play?
Boy, that's a great question because even if something is charging outside, there is still the potential for them to catch fire. I know that a lot of buildings now are requiring, for instance, when they're constructed, if you have underground parking, they're saying you have to be able to charge electric vehicles. Well, those electric vehicles have a charging station that can potentially catch fire. So there's some insurance companies that say we are not going to insure a building that has an electronic charging station or electric charging station in the building. So what you can do, if your insurance company says we will not insure the building with that charging station, you can make that an issue with your residents and say, listen, I'm sorry, this is an insurance issue. And
Okay.
make insurance the bad guy. Yeah, we're used to
Okay.
it.
Well, good then. I've got a couple questions in the chat before we jump over. They just want to know, can we elaborate on supervision requirements regarding these e-bikes, e-scooters? I mean, how does that kind of come into play here?
I think we're going to get into some of that a little bit
Okay.
later in the presentation. But the devil's in the details with things like that, right? It's a
Mhm.
lot of times it's how you word those requirements. Don't say something like all children must be accompanied by a parent. A
Yeah.
better way to phrase it is no unaccompanied minors. In some scenarios, an even better way to phrase it is rather than putting age restrictions on something, put rules that apply to everyone in place, even though they're mostly geared at children, like no
Right.
playing in the hallway. That
Mhm.
that goes for a 37-year-old and a 7-year-old. That way you can say we're not singling out children specifically, we're just saying this is something that no one can do.
Right. So make it broad then. Okay, that makes
Mhm.
sense. Now, can that be applied for curfews as well? Because I know that was another question that was just in the chat, speaking on specific curfew times.
I mean, I don't think I would recommend like a curfew of minors on your property. I think that's a little bit more circling the drain of fair housing, but you can employ quiet hours, right? And again, that's going to apply to everyone on the property, not just children. You could say after 10 p.m., 9:30 p.m., whatever it is, these are our quote unquote quiet hours. That means any excessive noise that disturbs people when they're sleeping is going to be a potential lease violation, depending on how bad it is and how long it goes on.
Okay.
And Karen
Yeah.
asked the question about being in California and that they're required to allow residents to store and charge in the apartment. And
Yeah.
this is always, there's always a, here's our general rule, but, right? So this is one of those but items. What you can do is require that that any hoverboard or e-bike that's stored in an apartment be UL certified. If not UL certified, just say we can't allow it. We can allow a UL certified unit in the apartment. And then that reduces your fire risk. Does that help, hopefully?
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you, Megan, because I was gonna ask that one next. So perfect. All right. So I think we're good on these questions here. Let's jump over to the next slide, which is going to be pools and communal spaces.
So, I mean, there is tension here, and there are going to be cases where there is tension between premises liability, fair housing, ADA. The trick is going to be to find a balance, and that's why my answer to almost every question is it depends, maybe, and it's situational because there's just not a solution that is going to be right for all of you, all of your properties in all of your jurisdictions. A lot of these issues and laws are specific to your own jurisdiction. Sometimes it's county to county, sometimes it's city to city within different counties. So it's always a good idea to consult with local counsel if you have any specific questions related to your property. That's my caveat. This is a good question. Kathleen raised this to me when we were discussing this webinar. How do you handle the potential conflict between making the pool area accessible to residents who have disabilities, potentially like wheelchair bound residents, and how do you still at the same time keep it safe for children, minors, and others who are maybe particularly vulnerable to attractive nuisances like pools? You just have to find the balance there. I don't think the solution is to just leave the pool gate open all the time so that residents with mobility issues can get in and out. That creates a huge safety issue when it comes to minors and younger folks on the property. So you may need to get creative about it. Find a special solution, whether it's an access key card thing,
Mhm.
um, whether there's an attendant there who can open and close the gate, whether it's a special type of latch that perhaps an adult who is wheelchair bound can figure out and get open, but a child cannot. Those are all sort of creative ways to potentially get around any fair housing issues. But anytime you have a claim of fair housing discrimination, the landlord's potential defense to that is if there is a legitimate, non-discriminatory business reason for the policy. Here, it's clearly a safety issue. So you are allowed to employ safety measures, particularly if the alternative is massive liability for the landlord because that creates financial or administrative burden on you as a landlord. And those are things that you can use to push back on fair housing claims. This is not a discriminatory policy. This is done for legitimate safety reasons. If we did it the way that this person, this tenant in a protected class wants us to do it, it would be far too burdensome on us from either a financial perspective, a liability perspective, or an administrative perspective.
With ADA versus child safety gate conflicts, who wins, I guess, is when it's a wheelchair accessible pool gate and it's also, child safety. Is ADA or child safety, which one wins in that kind of situation?
And I think they both win. Uh, and that's kind of the problem. So that's why I said everything is situational. If, for example, you're required to have lifeguards at your
Hmm.
pool, I think it's a good idea to have a lifeguard, even if you're not legally required to have one, because that way you have someone who's there working on your behalf who can ensure that the gate is closed at all times. There should be regular checks on the gate to make sure that it is closed and secured, particularly at the end of the day when the pool is closed. It's just little things like that. Walking the property, walking the perimeter of the pool, making sure that there are no defects in the fence, that there's nothing broken, nothing a child could easily climb over. If you notice those, you need to fix them as soon as possible, like yesterday.
For sure. And then, question for you, Megan. A Texas court handed down an $18 million verdict after management knew a pool gate had been left unlatched. What's the real difference from the claim side between a policy that says the gate gets checked or proof that it was?
That's a great question. So when you're determining liability, the key is whether or not there was negligence. So what would be expected of a reasonable person under the circumstances really drives everything. For instance, a property manager is entrusted with the safety of the property. Ideally, there would be proof or a written protocol that is strictly followed that shows that pool gates are checked, but don't have a policy that you don't follow all the time. So for instance, if you have a policy that every day, at X hour, when the pool opens and X hour when the pool's closed, that those gates are checked each time and potentially throughout the day, make sure that that is strictly followed because that's sort of your backstop if all else fails and there's an accident at the pool. Having a protocol and then following it to the letter of the law is key.
Perfect. Okay, perfect. And I know we had a pool webinar earlier in the year. So, people watching, if you want to dive more into the pool topic, feel free to check out that webinar there. But let's go ahead and jump into the next section, which is going to be parking and sidewalks.
So let's see if I think the key when you're talking about parking lots is that things happen quickly in parking lots and we all have blind spots, and particularly with the smaller the child, the tougher your sight lines are. And so having signs in your parking lot that say no unaccompanied minors, not no children, because that sounds discriminatory, but no unaccompanied minors will help potentially reduce the size of any judgment if there is an accident in the parking lot. So many things happen in a parking lot. I think all of us have been in a vehicle where somebody zips by in a bike, an e-bike or a hoverboard. They're going much faster than you expect. And so things happen. Well, by having that no unaccompanied minor sign, that kind of helps put some of the onus back on the adults in the household. It doesn't eliminate the chance for a claim or a lawsuit, but it helps put some of the onus back on the adults and then also remind them that really they have to take some responsibility in this. So that would be my thought on that.
Mhm. Yeah, and I would say I think even more so in like the parking garage than, for instance, the pool, where I think no unaccompanied minors on a sign in the pool area is logical, reasonable, and does not violate fair housing. If you're dealing with like a parking garage, let's say you've got teenagers who are old enough to drive, but they're still technically minors. They're going off to school and back. They may not have a parent with them at all times. So in those scenarios, you may want to consider, rather than just a no unaccompanied minors in the garage, restrict behavior, not people, right? So bring no playing, no reckless driving. That's going to apply to everybody. It doesn't matter how old you are. Obviously, the no playing is mostly directed at children, but this way it's just a blanket policy, applies to everybody. I don't care if you're 76, you can't be loitering in the garage, playing in the garage. There are also things that the landlord can do to try and mitigate potential accidents, like posting speed limit signs, making sure you enforce those speed limits, make sure that there's no sidewalk riding. That's a pretty big one. Those can lead to some accidents. Make sure that you have white paint in the garage that will open up sight lines, make things more visible. If you've got tight corners, put those mirrors there where people can theoretically see around them. Just little things like that. They're not going to prevent all accidents from happening. That's not the goal here today. Accidents are accidents, so they're going to happen no matter how hard you try to avoid them. The
Right.
key is to make sure that the landlord has done enough on the front end and on the back end of any incident to protect themselves from the nuclear verdicts. That's what we're trying to go for today.
Awesome. And a question just popped up in the chat too, and it asked kind of specifically of what you just kind of brought up. How would you phrase, that people can't bring their e-bikes or e-scooters on a pool deck?
Just say no e-bikes, no scooters on the pool deck.
I would
Okay.
I,
post, yeah,
You got to
post a
get
sign
specific.
right at the pool.
yeah,
In
I mean, you
addition to
can,
having it in the lease, and
right. Right. Yes, it's important to
absolutely.
have these things in the lease. I know a lot of leases, at least in that I see on a daily basis, will have a separate addendum for community policies, procedures, and rules. That usually talks about the pool, the fitness center, all of those common areas that are potentially hazardous to people. And they will have some of them will have blanket rules, and some of them will have more specific rules based on what the amenity is. Most people already say, rightly so, no glass containers in the pool area. Why? Because it's super dangerous. So you can also say no e-bikes in the pool area. Why? Because it's super dangerous.
Now, say I've got neighborhood kids on camera riding e-bikes with no helmet, which I mean, that's usually most of the time anyways. Only 50% actually wear helmets. But if I'm worried about their safety, the liability behind that, do I notify the parents? Do I save the footage? And for how long?
I think yes to all of those things. You don't always have to escalate all the way to a notice to vacate or an attempt to terminate a lease based on something like this. But if you think it may get there eventually to the point where you have to take action against these tenants, try and terminate their tenancy because they're not following the rules, even if it's their children that are not following the rules, one of our most powerful tools in those types of cases is documentation. We want a paper trail. I always say that we're building bricks in a wall, and the higher the wall gets, the more likely the landlord is to succeed in an eviction action. So if you just go right to a notice to vacate, at least in the state of Maryland and the city of Baltimore, a lot of judges are going to laugh you out of court and they're going to laugh me out of court. But if I come in and I say, we have warned them 10 times that this has been going on over the last 3 months and they've done nothing about it, that's a stronger case. So even
Yeah.
if it's a minor violation, if you see it, then I would at a minimum document it, note it in the file that this is when you saw it happen. Maybe it's an informal warning, just an email to the parents saying, hey, just wanted to let you know, we saw Timmy out there without his helmet on today, and we're just letting you know because we're concerned for safety reasons.
Now, what would good documentation look like?
I always like to see a formal incident report, but I understand that not everything that happens is going to end up in an incident report. I think at a minimum, it should be notes in the resident's file, and the notes should be specific: the date, the approximate time, the name of the witnesses. If it was something that happened outside and there was an accident, then you should note like weather conditions. Is it raining? Is it slippery outside? Was there thunder? Was there lightning? Was there heavy winds? All of those kinds of things are potentially going to be relevant in litigation and will be important later. If you've got security footage, I'm a big proponent of saving anything that you think might be relevant and saving it forever. But I do acknowledge that that's impractical for a lot of systems and for a lot of you guys. It's a heavy burden on you, and I understand that. When people bring these cases to me, I want to see the whole picture. I want to know everything that happened. I want to know what time it was. I want to know what you were eating that day. Things that you may not think are relevant could potentially become relevant. So the devil is in the details. Put down as much information as you can and document it in the file same day if possible. The closer to the incident that the documentation is, the more weight it's going to carry in court. If you write something up 6 months later, it's fundamentally it's useless to me.
Great
Okay.
question that's in the chat that I wanted to mention. She says, or asks, if we say no bike riding on the sidewalks, doesn't that just make more danger of them riding in the parking lots and hitting cars or being hit by a car? Can we say no bike riding on site? I love that question. I would say having that be part of the lease where you say please walk bikes off premises. If there's a more eloquent way to say it, perhaps there is. You may want to use that, but But that's lovely because at least if you have that as part of your policy and in the lease and somebody has to sign off on it, that they read that, that helps if there is an incident on the premises. Keep in mind though, you can't waive the rights of minors. So the adult may say, listen, I'm going to waive my rights to sue if I have an e-bike on the premises and on and on and on, or a hoverboard or anything like that, right? If I'm operating them on the premises in any way, I'm waiving my rights, but they can't waive the rights of a minor child. And so I would still have that information in the lease. I would still have them sign off. It does, again, sometimes it's sort of, you put into the mind of the person, wow, I do need to take some responsibility. That's sort of where I would go with that. I don't know if Melinda has anything to add to that.
I think that is the right answer.
Great. We got tons of good questions coming in the chat today.
Yeah, those
Let's
are
go ahead and
great.
move over to the next section, renovation and construction. And I'll let you to deep dive into this one as well.
All right, I think the attractive nuisance law can hold no owner liable even when the child is trespassing. Melinda, what's the argument about what's fair there?
Yeah,
What?
I mean, again, it's a balancing test. Yeah, the whole concept of attractive nuisance is the fact that there are things that you and I look at and know are dangerous, and we
Mhm.
need to stay away from them. But a child's brain is not developed to the point where they can identify this is dangerous if I go do this. They see, a pool that is not fenced in and accessible, and they think, oh, that looks like fun. Or they see construction equipment that is out in the open and they can get to, and then that looks like a great place to go play and climb on. Or that partially renovated unit over there with the door open, that seems like that would be a fun place to explore. They're not thinking about all of the things that we think about as far as why that's dangerous. They're basically lured in to the hazard. That's why it's an attractive nuisance, because it attracts them to it. And if you have something that is an attractive nuisance on your property, you know or should know that it's likely a child would kind of gravitate towards that, then you do have a duty to take steps that you can, reasonable steps to try and protect that area. Obviously, with
Mhm.
pools, the most obvious solution is a fence that is well maintained, not broken, doesn't have any gaps where children can slip through. Marissa, I see your question about Marissa says that she's got one or two properties that have pools. The pools are completely closed, inaccessible, and not intended for resident use, and they plan to keep them closed permanently. But she's asking if there's any safety issues, compliance requirements, or specific items that they should be checking. And I think, yes, I think you need to make sure that they are inaccessible. You need to make sure that there are signs posted. Even if the child isn't going to read the sign, the fact that the sign is there helps you, it should something happen. And you need to make sure that you are regularly doing inspections and checks of those things. Once you put a safety measure in place, you need to ensure that it continues to operate in good working order. Sometimes, not necessarily with pools, but sometimes it's even worse for a landlord if you have all of these safety measures in place and then you let them fall into disrepair and you don't maintain them, because that's an indication that you knew there was a danger there and then you just kind of threw up whatever your safety measure was and walked away. It's got to be ongoing responsibility from your end, from your maintenance team's end. If you're doing renovations somewhere, you need to make very clear to any contractors or vendors that they have to secure the property when they leave at the end of the day. These are things that are foreseeable, and you need to take reasonable steps to avoid.
The question comes up, I think, sometimes too, that if you're under active renovation at a property, it isn't necessarily generating income. Is it still fully covered under your general liability that is in place for the property? So the question is, it depends. So it's such a, it's just one of those things that if it's in the development phase, that's one issue. You're likely going to be covered under coverage in place for the construction period. If you are doing a rehab, a remodel, something like that, it depends on the policy. policies are not all created equal. So for instance, you need to ask your insurance broker. I don't expect anyone to dig into their policy to find exactly all the terms and conditions on this. Some of these policies, we have policies that are over 700 pages. And so you really want your broker doing that work for you. And then you want them to tell you in writing what is or isn't covered. So for instance, some policies will allow you to do a rehab, maintain your general liability coverage in place. And as long as the cost of that rehab or remodel is not over a certain threshold. So maybe that number is 500,000 or 1 million. The minute you get over that, there is no coverage under that policy. So you want to make sure that the person doing the work on the property is providing that coverage, or that the owner has arranged coverage while the property is under construction. So the real issue is making sure before the construction starts what the scope of the project is, and then confirming with your insurance broker in writing that coverage will extend while you're doing the work on the property. And then, of course, safeguarding the premises is really key. Locked doors, having signs on the door, access only to construction personnel, anything like that that would deter someone from going in or be a warning would be a real positive for the property.
Now, Megan, do insurance providers require that the sites be surveyed with cameras? Or, I mean, I see some of those mobile trailers in renovation and construction sites all the time. So is that
Yeah.
something that's required or?
Oh, such a good question. So if it's a minor project, not necessarily. However, on a major development, if you're doing ground up construction, 100%, every single insurance company who's insuring builders risk these days, they all want to see monitoring of those sites. They want to see cameras monitoring. And in fact, when it comes to the premises themselves, apartment buildings, when you look at the supplemental applications that insurance companies are using these days, all of them are going to ask the question, do you have cameras on site? And how many cameras do you have? What they haven't made that next step towards, which I find incredibly valuable, is it live monitoring. So at this point, insurance companies are asking the question, how many cameras? Do you have cameras and how many? And eventually, I'm hoping the live monitoring comes in, because the deterrence rate is unbelievable compared to just having cameras to document what happened. It's like seeing the car wreck after it already happens. What if you could
Yeah,
avoid the car wreck? They're completely, in a different class.
I stand by that one. Why, documenting or preventing, two big differences there. All right. Well, let's jump out to the next section. We're going to go into windows and balconies.
Yeah, this is, I will say, my very toughest day at work. I was looking at the loss runs for a national property owner and manager of a third party manager, and some of their properties were in West Palm Beach. I'm obviously not using the name of the company, but within those loss runs, there were at least two incidences where toddlers were able to get through the railings on the balconies and died. And it was a long day. And I remember driving home. I was living in Seattle at the time. I was driving across the bridge and driving into my garage, and my husband was coming out of the garage, and he said, "How was your day?" And I just looked at him and my face fell and tears coming out of my eyes. I said, "It was terrible." He looks at me, "What?" I mean, not many insurance brokers get teary-eyed at work, trust me. But reading those loss runs was just sickening. So pretty much in every jurisdiction, you have a rule about balcony railings being no more than 4 inches apart. Now, some buildings are older and they're grandfathered in, so you may have wider divisions between your railings on the balcony. But I'm telling you right now, if they're more than 4 inches, that rule was set for a reason. Kids' heads can fit between any distance greater than those 5 inches. And so originally, there was a 6-inch gap allowed. And then there were some rules that were changed in 1975 and then eventually 1978, and then it was changed to the 4 inches. Now, local ordinances may require older buildings to be retrofitted, but it's different jurisdiction by jurisdiction. So literally this is an it depends question. Also, some of these same rules apply to the distance between stair railings and the distance between that bottom rail and the bottom step as well. So what's going to be important to you is to know by your jurisdiction what the question is. And also, if you're doing a substantial structural overhaul to a structure, you're going to need to know what the rule is, particularly for the balcony, right? If you're redoing balconies, when you redo that balcony, you're really going to have to make sure that you're no more than 4 inches apart, especially when you know that it's an exposure. If you've ever heard of anything like this, you're going to want to make sure that that happens. So understanding what the rules are in your jurisdiction is important, but also knowing that if you're doing any rehab, making that change to that 4 inches is key.
Okay. Now I know, Megan, you and Melinda have probably seen some of the worst footage from some of these claim files, and
Yeah.
I'm not asking for you to reveal that by any means. What's one thing about balcony risk property managers need to understand?
Yeah, you know what? Those railings don't listen. If kids are climbing on railings, if you see kids climbing on railings, if there's furniture up against the railing with children in the unit, you need to be careful and warn the parents and just say, hey, we noticed such and such that Johnny was climbing on the furniture and we're concerned. Would you mind moving that chair away from the railing? So being aware of your surroundings, looking at obviously looking at the footage, and then just saying something to the parents. And we can all sometimes our approach will determine what the result from the other party is, how receptive they are. And so I would just say being aware of what's going on and protecting the safety of your of the children, but also protecting the owners, because you're tasked with protecting the owners from a lawsuit that would have a grave financial consequence to them. If someone sues because their child came off a balcony, first of all, do you have a defense? Did you see unsafe activity? Did you warn? If the railings are too far apart, boy, I'll tell you, your defense is gone and you're going to pay out a lot of money. So being aware of the circumstances and warning, I would say, are key issues as a,
Yeah.
protector of the property.
And I think, regular routine maintenance too. If you have balconies, I think those are frequently overlooked when property managers are turning an apartment to bring in a new tenant. They should
Mhm.
not be overlooked. Inspect them. If there are loose railings, they need to be fixed. If there's cracking, warping of the wood, those are things that need to be notated and addressed. So just
Mhm.
regular routine maintenance goes a very long way. And obviously, you need to document when you do that maintenance, because that way you've got a paper trail and a record. You can say, well, we just inspected this a month ago and that wasn't broken at the time. And then you can prove that maybe it does, someone in their household broke it, and that shifts the liability, kind of puts it back on them a little bit.
Let's keep it moving. I know there's some more questions in the chat, and I promise you guys we're going to answer those questions once we come to the end. But next transition, I can't be everywhere at once. Jump into this because I know we can't all be all, see all at once, and this is a huge thing that parents are always bringing up. And is this a defense? Can this be used in the court of law? I'm sure you guys probably hear that often.
Right.
From parents and whatnot. So, when they say that, what's, generally your response, and how can they combat that? How can property managers, kind of combat that as well?
I like seeing a company that will go out, take a look at the premises, determine where the lighting should be improved, where the cameras can be improved, and then you let the cameras do some of that work for you, because you're right, you can't be there all the time. And so having cameras do some of that work makes a really big difference. And also I like that when there's a talk down feature, so that if you see unsafe activity, and I can give you an example. We had a property in Atlanta, and Atlanta has some wonderful areas, and then it has some areas that are more challenging. And there was a particular property, which I have walked across, beautiful property, that had a group of people congregating. Now, they had cameras, but the cameras were there to document. They weren't there. There was no AI intelligence. There was no live monitoring. This group of people was congregating. There was some bad behavior going on. There was nobody to stop it. Had there been a talk down feature, they could have said, hey, could everyone please disperse? It was drug related, because there was somebody who walked by who was not involved in that activity, who ended up getting shot and killed. They were just in the line of fire. But if you had had surveillance doing some of the work for you, number one, it wouldn't put any human being at risk. And number two, it would have dispersed the activity potentially before anything happened. And so I'm a big fan of that, is using surveillance to take the place of even live security guards, because a security guard also ends up getting in the line of fire as well. Save the money, put it into the surveillance, into live monitoring.
Right.
And
And I
that's,
think in the
uh,
context of kids, that's
mhm.
potentially helpful too. It goes back to the whole attractive nuisance. Kids' brains aren't developed. A lot of times they're doing this stuff. Maybe they know they shouldn't be doing it, but they also think no one is watching them do it,
Oh, yeah.
right? Just the little voice chiming in, letting them know we see you, sometimes is enough to make them stop what they're doing, because now they're afraid they're going to get in trouble, right?
Right.
Now they think mom might find out.
Mm-hmm. And it's on film.
That's
It's
right.
on film. It's not their word versus a security guard who may or may not be armed, by the way. So love a good camera.
And that's where we really step in. Cloud is structure, truly the gold standard for multi-family video surveillance. We could take over your existing cameras. Most companies, most communities already have cameras. So we could take over your existing infrastructure, add our software, and then give you that remote guarding aspect. So
Mm-hmm.
with us being cloud-based, you have that ability and the storage to hold the recordings, hold the footage, for 30 days and beyond, with the ability to download and create those files and playlists, for ongoing issues, or maybe unruly residents if you're building those use case eviction notices, kind of what we spoke to earlier. So got you covered there. And then using the speaker technology, I think that's very powerful, helping deter crime right then and there, instead of
Mm-hmm.
just collecting evidence for after the fact. So, that's what we do at Cloud Structure. And I mean, if you're looking for quotes, or it is budget season. Budget season is right around the corner. So if you're looking for customized quotes or proposals to see what we could do with your existing cameras, or I mean, if you don't have cameras at all, we are a full-on video surveillance company. So we could add cameras to blind spot areas, add new systems if you don't already have them. Let's transition over to how technology helps.
You know what? I want to mention.
Kids will be kids. They'll race scooters through the parking lot, sneak into the pool after hours, explore places they probably shouldn't. But it only takes one bad decision to turn a fun afternoon into a child getting seriously hurt. Cloud Structure's AI-powered surveillance helps property managers spot risky situations as they happen, from after-hours amenity use to unauthorized access and suspicious activity. When it counts, remote guarding professionals step in with a voice warning that stops kids in their tracks.
Kindly refrain yourself immediately.
Because protecting your property isn't just about preventing crime. It's about keeping your youngest residents safe, too. Cloud Structure. Smarter security, safer communities.
JT, what I wanted to throw in too is that these days, every insurance company, when they're underwriting a multifamily risk, they're going to look at your crime score. So from a score of 0 to 100, they're going to gauge properties, right? And we have properties, I'll tell you, and 20, by the way, insurance companies love a good 20. You get above 20, which so many properties are, and it's more concerning. So whether or not you have cameras, and by the way, dummy cameras might be great, but they really don't count when it comes to insurance underwriting. So I saw that question. You could put a fake camera, but it's not going to do the work of getting your insurance company to want to write your risk. They're really going to want to see cameras. So if you do put in a great system, particularly with AI monitoring, you want to tell your insurance broker because they will use that information to help negotiate on your behalf. And that will make a big difference depending on your crime score as to what insurance companies will accept you, number one, and it will actually affect your rates. So all important.
Great, great. If you're interested in a demo, would like to know more about any of the topics that we discussed, please fill out that little poll that just popped up on the screen there. And then I know we got some other questions that popped up in the chat here. It looks like, what does AI difference mean relating to cameras? And I mean, truly the AI, the difference the AI is going to make, with cloud structure, we're utilizing the AI in different ways with helping us with the notification aspect. But I mean, the AI could really help with the details as far as facial recognition. If you have repeat offenders, continuously hopping the pool area or just continuously being a nuisance, the AI could actually notify you anytime that person, the facial recognition feature with the AI could actually notify you anytime that person is on property. So there's different ways the AI could really help with the cameras. I think it's truly a benefit, but from notification to other features that are in the AI, it truly helps you get a leg up and one up with situations like that. Another question that popped up, where do you find your crime scores?
Great question. So we have access to that, obviously, through some proprietary systems. So I think you want to go to your insurance broker. Just have them do it because it will cost you nothing. So if you were to look it up on your own there, you may have to sign into a system and pay a cost, but your insurance broker should be able to pull that up.
Okay, great, great.
I think Dylan had a question about confronting minors if you notice that they're participating in unsafe activities. And
Yeah.
the answer to that one is really going to shock you guys. It depends. It depends on the situation, the specific situation. Look, if there are kids playing with knives out in the parking lot, for example, that is an immediate danger, I would say. So in that scenario, I think that it is okay for someone to go and address the children directly, particularly if there are no parents around. I mean, if there's parents there, then I would maybe try and talk to them first. Although I do understand that sometimes that can be confrontational. It can also be confrontational if parents see you talking to their children. Why are you telling my kid what to do? The answer is because you're not. But don't say that. Just say, look, we think that this is really dangerous. We need to try and stop it. Play it like we're trying to protect your kids' safety, not just other people, not our liability. We want to make sure your child doesn't get hurt. I think if it's not an immediate thing, probably better to speak to the parents. But again, your residents better than I do, and some of them you may understand that that's not going to be a productive conversation. So there are times when it's probably a good idea to loop in your local council and ask them what they propose is the best way to do this. Do we do a formal notification? Do we just kind of try and give them a call on the phone for an informal chat in our office about it? It's going to be situational to an extent. But it is good to keep in mind when you are talking to minors that you are talking to minors and that you are an adult. The other question I saw was from Lori. If someone requests to review camera footage because they had like a package stolen or a vehicle damaged, is the landlord required to look through the footage and find the incident? And then the answer to that, wait for it, It depends. At least in some jurisdictions here in Maryland, they actually have laws now that require cameras in multifamily buildings and communities. And in those circumstances, the law also says that if a law enforcement or a resident or someone else who's on the property with permission comes to you and they have a valid reason that they want to see the footage, like my car was broken into last night, then the landlord is required to review the footage and to save the footage, and potentially, if necessary, provide it to them either then or later on down the line. So that's something that's going to depend on where your property is located.
For sure. And to piggyback on that, Lori, at Clouded Structure, we will conduct investigations for you on your behalf. So, I mean, if something happens during monitoring hours or non-monitoring hours, we can research the footage for you and investigate that, provide a comprehensive, detailed report, let you know what we found, as well as any pictures or video clips pertaining to that. So we knock all that out for you. Truly, the platform itself, it's very easy to work with. I mean, I always say, if you could use Google search, you could use our platform. There's tons of keywords that you could simply just type in to help you filter out all that footage. Because to your point, I remember being on site, shifting through countless hours of videos and recordings is horrible. But the platform itself is really designed to be user friendly and help you eliminate time and that burden of searching through. So typing in those keywords, but again, we can knock that out for you. You will have a dedicated account manager that can help you out with those investigations.
And I'm looking, Brenda has a question as well.
Yeah. So again, this is going to depend on where your property is located. Different states and different jurisdictions have different laws when it comes to privacy things. But the general rule is whether or not the person has a reasonable expectation of privacy. If they are out in public somewhere, for the most part, no reasonable expectation of privacy. If I'm out on the streets of Baltimore, I assume I am on a camera somewhere at all times. So if you're out in public and there's no reason for you to think that you have privacy, then you don't necessarily need to disclose that there's cameras recording them. If it's inside of a unit or inside of the leasing office, that's potentially a different scenario. And some states, Maryland being one of them, are two-party consent states, meaning everyone who's being recorded has to know and consent to it for it to be legal. But that depends. There's one-party consent states as well. So that's something I would recommend you consult local counsel on if you have a specific question about your jurisdiction where your properties are.
Perfect. Well, I think we're right at time. So definitely want to appreciate Megan and Melinda for joining us today. Thank you so much. On the screen are their direct email addresses. So if you have any questions regarding fair housing, insurance, liability, any of those questions, please feel free to reach out to them directly and pose any questions that you may have. But again, we will send a copy of the recording. I know that question came up, and I just want to thank you guys for spending the day with us. But till next time, you guys have a great rest of the day, and I appreciate you joining.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.